Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
The Trump administration is looking to overhaul federal employees' avenues for appealing adverse personnel actions. As that gets underway, former officials from the Merit Systems Protection Board are warning of significant consequences for the civil service. Here with more detail is Federal News Network's Drew Friedman. Drew, thanks for joining me.
Anytime, Terry.
Let's back up for a minute as we think about what these changes are. What exactly has the Trump administration been planning to change for the federal employee appeals process?
These changes have been occurring over the last several months. The Office of Personnel Management has proposed regulations in 3 different areas that would change the appeals process for federal employees. This would be in cases where federal employees are removed due to a reduction in force or an agency RIF, a probationary firing, or a suitability action. So in those cases, if a federal employee believes that their agency incorrectly or wrongfully terminated them, employees can appeal those actions. Generally, how it works and how it has for many decades is that the Merit Systems Protection Board, or MSPB, handles those cases and issues decisions on whether or not it was a wrongful termination. But these new proposed regulations from OPM would move that authority away from MSPB and into OPM internally itself. So a pretty significant change here for federal employees.
What is that going to feel like in practice? I mean, one appeals chain versus another doesn't sound like a big difference. How is this going to play out?
In addition to there being a change in what agency is overseeing those decisions and handling those appeals processes, there's also going to be a change in what that process actually looks like. So OPM, in addition to moving the authority to itself, is looking to remove what's called a discovery phase for those cases. So employees there wouldn't be a period where there's information collected, and it would only be as needed that OPM would run an investigation into the situation. Federal employees would also lose their right to have a hearing in most cases, and instead OPM would rely only on the written record. And then there would also be more limited opportunities for employees to petition the reconsideration of a decision on their appeal. So a lot of the steps of the process are essentially being taken out here for a majority of cases. And again, these are proposed regulations, so nothing has changed yet, but this is clearly where the Trump administration is looking to go. Raymond Limon, who is a former MSPB member under the Biden administration, he retired in 2025, and he's been raising concerns that OPM's actions are not aligned with what congressional intentions were of the 1978 Civil Service Reform Act. He describes in his own words what federal employees stand to lose under OPM's changes.
You lose a neutral adjudicator, someone who doesn't work for the agency that fired you. You lose the right to a hearing with live testimony. You lose discovery. You lose federal court review. OPM would be simultaneously writing the rules and judging your case under those rules. And it's all being done through either executive orders or OPM regulations. Congress hasn't done anything to change those laws. This is very troubling.
Drew, what are the other concerns that MSPB officials have brought up? They're kind of being written out of the process.
If this was to happen and take effect, there are a lot of concerns from former MSPB officials, as well as many other organizations in the federal space, worry that there will be essentially a conflict of interest with OPM, as Ray Limon mentioned, being both the start and the end of the process. There's also concerns that this is going to erode due process for federal employees and remove transparency into appeals just by having fewer steps in that process. It's raising concerns, of course, too, that employees will be losing a shot at a fair decision and a fair hearing of their appeals. We also heard from Richard Vateris, who's a retired MSPB administrative judge, and he explains his position on this.
Obviously, as a retired MSPB judge, I would not want to see that happen because the board, you see, is an independent agency that doesn't have a dog in the fight. Board judges independently review what happened against the regulation. And there's an argument that if you take that authority away from the board and give it to OPM, that there's a greater danger that agency actions would be rubber stamped.
A little bit like the fox guarding the henhouse, so to speak.
You could say that, yes.
What does OPM say about why they're making these changes then?
The Trump administration and OPM say that this would streamline and make the process more efficient. They also say it would reduce costs not only for agencies and employees, but also for the taxpayer, and that it would ease the burden on agencies who are having to deal with appeals as a result of adverse actions that may be taking place. There was a recent opinion article from Noah Peters, who's a senior advisor at OPM in Bloomberg Law, and he talked about the idea that this would be beneficial to employees who he said would no longer have to navigate what he called a convoluted process at the MSPB. And he also argues that there is, under this 1978 Civil Service Reform Act precedent, or it, it just follows that OPM should be the one to be making these decisions. So he was pretty strongly advocating for the idea of transferring this jurisdiction away from MSPB and again to OPM.
And OPM is also considering changes to the RIF process at the same time, right?
That's right. So these the changes for the appeals process do include RIF actions, but then there's also more broadly changes to the RIF process itself. So there's a separate proposed regulation from OPM and the Trump administration that would change the order of a retention register when an agency does a RIF. Right now, their tenure and seniority are usually prioritized when conducting a RIF and determining who gets to keep their jobs and who gets removed. The Trump administration is looking to flip that around to have performance be the top factor for consideration and the priority for whether or not to keep employees during a RIF. They said that by having performance, it would help keep employees who are doing their job well versus those that have simply just been there for a long time. But there have been concerns as well with that area, just saying that it would have negative impacts on federal employee expertise, recruitment, and retention, and some questions about whether there's truly evidence that changing that order would produce better outcomes in a RIF.
Are we at the stage now where we just need to wait on the draft regulations and see what the specifics will be?
All of these proposed regulations are exactly that. They are proposed. They're not finalized yet. So there's been public comment periods for all of these where we're going to see how people are kind of responding to what's been proposed or planned here from the administration. So the next steps would be we'll eventually see final regulations or rules come out on all of these at some point, potentially later this year.
That's Federal News Network's Drew Friedman. Drew, thanks for joining me.
Absolutely. Thanks, Terry.
You can find her full story at federalnewsnetwork.com.